So I am going to talk about how this revolution, some people say 2 revolutions, some people say it's 1.5, affected the Egyptian economy. Swedish social scientist Gunnar Myrdal was a man who never thought that you can separate economics from other subjects. And he has this to say: there is no, almost word by word, there is no such a thing as an economic problem, political problem, social problem, etc. There are only problems, and they are complex. And I think this is absolutely true. We cannot possibly understand what has happened in the Egyptian economy in the last 3 years without mixing all this together. Let me start then. The situation, the economic situation in Egypt now is dismal. It's really dismal, and it has been bad for the last, since the revolution. And maybe almost all the economic indicators show deterioration, with the possible exceptions of 2, labor remittances from abroad and the revenues from the Suez Canal. But apart from that, everything is showing deterioration. I will give you a few of the major examples with some figures. One is the growth of GDP. Is now less than half, sorry, it is the growth of GDP for the last 3 years on average is less than the growth of population. So the standard of living as an average even has been declined. When it was double the population growth in the previous 3 years. The rate of unemployment, it used to be calculated by the official figures as 7 to 8% before the revolution. Now it's at least 14. So it's almost double. And this 14% of the labor force. And these are official statistics. And we never really agreed, we never accepted the official statistics. But even if you do rely on the official statistics, the rate of unemployment now is about double what it was 3 years before the the national and foreign investment has fallen tremendously. Foreign debt has increased from $33 billion when the revolution took place, foreign debt. Now it is approaching 50 with the new loans from the Gulf. It was 43 in June, last June. From 33 to 43, but with the recent agreement with the Gulf countries, it's now approaching $50 billion. The domestic debt before the revolution was a little bit less than 1 trillion Egyptian pounds, which is a bit less than the total GDP. Now it's approaching 2 trillion Egyptian pounds, which is far above the GDP. The budget deficit was 8% before the revolution, now it's 14%. With all that it means, the impact on inflation, the inability to spend on education and health, etc. And lastly, the reserves of foreign currency. We started with a very handsome amount, $36 billion. Now it is 18, which is half. I'm sure we can add all sorts of other dismal figures. How do we locate this very poor performance in a longer historical perspective? I had a British journalist about 2 months ago visiting me, and he addressed that question to me. Okay, this is very bad. How do you locate it? How do you look at it in a larger historical context? So I started with him, comparing him, going back in history to try to find out which period was just as bad or was almost as bad. Now, the 3 years before the revolution, these were 3 years of the international economic and financial depression, which affected Egypt, but the GDP grew at about 4 to 5%, not like 2 or less now. So these are the 3 years just before the revolution. So we were affected by the crisis, but not as badly as we are doing now. The 4 years before that, that means 2004 to 2008, these are the Nazif government. Nothing was really done for improving the economic structure. Unemployment certainly increased, but the rate of growth was fantastic, was 7% during the Nazif government. We were not satisfied because everything else was going bad. So it's only that the rate of the GDP was rising, but unemployment was rising, distribution of income deteriorated, but at least the growth, the GDP was growing. In the 20 years before that, that from 84 to 2004, these are all fall in the Mubarak era. This period was bad in another way, in a different way. It was very badly affected by the return of the many migrants from the Gulf. With the decline in the Gulf, when the decline of the oil prices, remittances fell and unemployment, of course, increased. Added to this that the IMF forced us from 1991 to apply very contractive policies which increased unemployment, reduced the rate of growth, but it was still between 4 to 5% during these 20 years, from 1984 to 2004. Before that, this was the strange period of Sadat and a bit of Mubarak, 1974 to 1984. These are the great period of, great, I am saying it sarcastically, of infitah. And the Egyptian economists were very unhappy about it. We were so afraid that it will destroy our existing industries by opening the doors to competition from imports. Inflation was exceedingly high and foreign debt was increasing very rapidly. But this was great in a sense that the rate of growth of GDP was unprecedented. From 74 to 84, largely because of migration to the Gulf. You know, migration was a great boom to the Egyptian economy, with all its shortcomings, but still it was quite affluent. The period was quite prosperous, despite of the deficiencies underneath. And to the extent, this is something we haven't experienced since then, foreign, as well as Egyptian economists, started talking about scarcity of labor. Can you imagine? There was a scarcity of labor because of the great mass movement outside to the Gulf. But this didn't last long. From 85, 86, unemployment started to grow up till now. From 86, unemployment has been growing up till now. That's how many years ago? Almost 30 years of rising unemployment. No wonder, you know, the crimes and the violence and the ease by which you mobilize people for demonstrations. It's the result of this. So, in order to find something comparable to what we are in now, you have to go to this dismal period between the two wars, 67 and 73. These were awful years, and I lived it day by day, from 67 to 73. And that's everything, that's as a result of the defeat of 67, mainly a result of the Suez Canal was closed, tourists stopped coming, investment had to be dropped immensely, oil of Sinai was lost as a result of the 67 war. And so GDP declined, the rate of growth of GDP declined immensely. So this is the nearest I could find to the situation. And of course, unemployment grew to the situation now. But with a difference in favor of that old period. The government there were 3 years under Nasser and 3 years under Sadat, before Sadat got betrayed completely the Nasser legacy. So in this period, at least the government was loyal to the poor, was concerned about the underprivileged. So they controlled the prices. They were committed to employ university graduates on their graduation. They were making sure that essential goods were in the Jama'iyat, which have disappeared, almost disappeared. So even, although the situation was really comparable with what it is now, it was better in that respect. People expected the government to care about the poor, about them. I don't think there is that feeling now, which will become obvious as I go on. Why is the situation so unique? Almost unique. We don't find a parallel except to go back 40 years. No. Is it because of the revolution? Is it because any revolution disrupts economic life? Of course, revolutions do disrupt economic life, but that is not always the case. Revolutions could actually cause great enthusiasm. Do you remember the young men and women paving the pavement in the early days of the revolution? Was that something promising, something marvelous in the economy as well as everywhere else? It didn't happen. It didn't happen. So actually, as the revolutions cause disruption, it could also cause great enthusiasm. It could bring some very good results. Why is it that it didn't happen this time? I here have to use an Arabic word. Sawrat akhir zaman. When translated, it would be revolutions à la mode, or according to the most recent fashion. And why do I say? Because it seems to me that revolutions now, the Egyptian revolution, I suspect the other Arab revolutions as well, can be described as Sawrat Akhir Zaman. Almost throughout history, when a successful revolution takes place, the people who made the revolution take the power. Surprise with this. The people make the revolution and they are never allowed to participate in decision taking. And that is true from the time Mubarak left office on the 28th of February till now. I will be as bold as them. Till now, the people who made the revolution were not allowed to participate. غريبة. And this is what I call Sawrat Akhir Zaman. You want evidence? I will quickly give you evidence, one after the other. The first people who took power was the Majlis al-Askari. But the Majlis al-Askari, ya Jama'ah, is headed by a man who has served under Mubarak in very important position for about 20 years. And the rest of the office, the members of the council, were of the same, they had the same similar history. Strange, isn't it, that after a successful revolution, the power would be handed to an authority which is part and parcel of the regime where millions of people went to the streets to protest against. The first prime minister, partly before Mubarak resigned and partly after Ahmed Shafiq, he has been caught making a rude remark about the young people in the Tahrir and وزع عليهم بونبوني. That's a famous statement. But then Assam Sharaf came. Assam Sharaf, I don't know where they got him from. He was seen in Tahrir Square, and I now wonder whether he was actually told to go, because we are going to bring you a prime minister. I sometimes think like that, but I really don't know. He has no political history at all. And through the period in which he is a prime minister, he never uttered a revolutionary sentence, you know. And the only thing that happened which could affect the economy, تغيير الساعة. You know, up till now, you know, but instead of 7 o'clock, but 6 o'clock. But, you know, that is the only thing that lasted, you know. That is the only thing that Hassan Sharaf has done as far as the economy is concerned. He neither brought law and order, neither revived tourism, nor got the money back which was smuggled by the old regime. Nothing at all. I don't know whether I should tell you this or not, but I find it very significant, even though it may sound trivial, because it was a personal experience. About 2 months or so after the revolution, after February, I was invited to a meeting for the reform of the economy in a very luxurious hotel, أظن فندق الماسة, belonging to the armed forces. I was actually pleased and optimistic. I thought I would participate with a group of economists to think what we should do. I went. I was shocked to find large tables of croissant and petit four and all sorts of drinks. About 150 people invited to participate, artists, actors, politicians of all kinds, and 5 or 6 economists. Of course, I had despair immediately. But you can't reform the economy in this circumstance. And then an officer quite of a high rank, I don't know his name, stood up and gave a speech, a very long speech, documented with on a screen like this, and fantastic figure, up to date, which no economist of us has access to. Really, the state of the tourist industry until yesterday, until the day before. Amazing. But the message of the speech was how awful the situation is. And I never forget that. That was only 2 months after he was telling us and the people that our situation is terrible. At that time, the foreign reserve was still good, you know. Tourism, there was still some tourism, etc. But I don't know how he reached that. Think about it. I want you to think about it. Why, I wonder why this message was said so early on. And I asked when the time came for me to ask, I asked to talk, and I said, why didn't you distribute these figures to us economists about a few days ago, so that we would sit and think and come prepared for the discussion? But of course, that was just impossible. Then came Al-Ganzouri. When people started to be completely fed up with Hassan Sharaf, came Ganzouri. Ganzouri is famous also. He cooperated with Mubarak for many, many years in different, including Prime Minister. But he was also, his name is linked with Tusk, which is a disastrous idea. A disastrous idea. And all the informed, well-informed people objected. المرحوم رشدي سعيد ويدي wrote articles. قالوا لا أصل المشروع ده عزيز قوي على الرئيس. That this is very dear to the president's heart. Don't touch. So Al-Ganzouri was linked with this. How can you possibly, when you change Hassan Sharaf, bring somebody who is just as anti-revolutionary? Then the presidential campaign. Everybody was allowed to participate. When you make a revolution, exclude some people who were participating in the old regime. Let everybody, some actors, some comedians actually became candidates for the president. I remember in '52, one of the first things, dissolved all the parties, those who corrupted political life before should be excluded, but nothing of the sort happened. Then after this long mess of واحد يرشح نفسه وبعدين يعتذر, and we don't know what is going on. You know, you remember Mansour Hassan going in and then no, I'm going out. Omar Suleiman, I'm going in, no, I'm going out. God knows what is. And then finally we are left with two to choose between two. Ahmed Shafiq and Mohammed Morsi. Mohammed Morsi we never heard about before. We never heard about him before. Well, Ahmed Shafiq, I described it to you. So the difference between them is one wants to get Egypt back 30 years, and the other wanting to get Egypt back 3 centuries, at least. And people were at a loss, which is actually a bit, we don't know, style. Then Morsi succeeded. What did he do? I am reminding you, because you know all these things, I'm just putting them together. I'm reminding you that one of his early decisions is shops should be closed at 10 o'clock at night, in a state of unemployment which is almost unprecedented in Egypt. To let people work. No, at 10 o'clock it's over. When people couldn't believe it, it was withdrawn, postponed until it was forgotten. It was never applied. Then the rhetoric of Dr. Morsi would never encourage tourists to come, because tourists would be afraid that Islamic law would be applied on them on the beach. And any sensible tourist would not come with a middle-aged rhetoric of that kind. He used to go to the dawn prayer in a mosque, and some people counted, he said, there were 3,000 soldiers and officers guarding him to go to pray the dawn. So when someone journalist objected, he said that this costs money, this costs money. So he said, terribly arrogantly, I bet anything that this journalist does not pray the dawn. What has it got to do? And there is a mosque inside the president's palace. You know, he could have gone. Two things of economic nature took place. The Sukuk al-Islamiyya and Mashru' Qanat Suez. They have not been implemented, but they were terribly ominous. In the Sukuk al-Islamiyya, Islamic bonds, if you like, they were really seen, at least by me, as a way of selling public enterprise to private enterprise, whether foreign or national. But to make it pass, they call it Islamic. Dr. Mahmoud Muhyiddin did exactly the same, but failed to make it pass before the revolution. But it's السكوك الشعبية, the popular sukuk. But it had exactly the same purpose. And but at least the sukuk بتاعت Dr. Muhyiddin was easier to understand. The Morsi sukuk was so much involved in Islamic terminology, old Islamic terminology, it was difficult. This is as for the Suez Canal project, it was seen very clearly as a way of slicing, you know, excluding certain part of the Egyptian territory from state control, you know. And what was called Qlim Suez included all sorts of things, north of Sinai, south of Sinai, west of the canal. And the authority which was to be established was to be free from any authority intervention. You know. But luckily it didn't take place. Then a coup took place or a revolution took place in 30th of June. I really don't attach much importance to whether it is a coup or a revolution. It has some symptoms of a revolution and certainly some symptoms of a coup. If you like it very much, you call it a revolution because revolution sounds more respectable. If you don't like it at all, you call it coup because coup doesn't sound right, morally not right. But I believe, as far as economics is concerned, a revolution can do wonders, but it can also make a mess. And so would a coup. A coup can reform and it can make a mess. So it really doesn't matter whether you call it a coup or a revolution. It made a mess. It made, at least up till now, sorry. It is only 3 or 4 months since the 30th of June. But we haven't really seen any success yet. This is important. If you look, the new president, Abdi Mansour, is not a political man. We don't know what his sympathies really are. The cabinet includes 2 or 3 who have revolutionary history, but the rest are technocrats. We have to admit. Wazir al-Takhtit Ashraf al-Arabi was the director, if I'm mistaken, correct me, he was the director of the office of Faiza Abu Naga, وزيرة التعاون الاقتصادي under Mubarak. He was Mudir Maktab Faiza Abu Naga. He is now Wazir al-Takhtit. And if you want a successful revolution, أول حاجة تفكر فيها plan. To plan for the next month, for the next 6 months, for the next year, for the next 5 years. To choose a minister of planning who had this history, wouldn't it make you suspicious? But I have other examples as well, which I'm not going to bother you with. I'm just asking you to think that what you can expect from this government. One example of the failure, they cannot bring law. All right, it is only 3 or 4 months since they took power, but they haven't established law and order. With regard to the directly referring to economic policy, you find the same old rhetoric which was used even before the revolution. No new conceptions of what should be done. The same old conceptions, as I will give you example of. My first example is the problem of subsidies. I think I have been hearing that one major economic problem of Egypt is the subsidy problem. I have been hearing about it since I was 8 years old, and nothing was done. I am exaggerating a bit. It is about 40 years ago. It's the mid-70s. It was recognized as one major economic problem, and no progress could be taken unless we solve that. Because it now represents 1/3 of the total government expenditure. If you add to it the interest on domestic debt, it constitutes 50% of total government expenditure. If you continue doing this, you can have very little to spend on education, on health, on infrastructure, and it causes, the deficit causes inflation. Why isn't it never solved? Every government is talking about the subsidy, and since the mid-70s, but it is never solved. I have a very simple and obvious explanation. When the government is so corrupt, subsidizing the essential goods is the easiest way to keep the people quiet. Because if you cancel the subsidies of bread, for instance, or similar stuff, edible oil, if you cancel or greatly reduce the subsidy, you have either at the same time solve the distribution, economic income distribution problem. And ideally, you should solve the subsidy problem because it has been an old problem. Solve it gradually, but step by step with improving the income distribution. That is the ideal. The subsidy is a very bad economic policy from the economic rationality point of view. You don't solve the problem of the poor like that. But so let us by all means reduce the subsidy, but as you reduce it, improve, bring more social justice to the poor. And you could do that only to the extent that you succeed. If you are not willing to change the income distribution because the government is corrupt, then the only way is to keep the subsidy. Now, in order to finance both the subsidies and corruption, you go to get loans from abroad. So the function of loans from abroad is simply this. Because loans from abroad do not solve the economic problem. It just postpones, like the subsidy, exactly the same. You know, that, so you, if you want to solve it, you have to attack to improve the economic structure, to increase productive services, private sector. But if you are not doing that, and corruption is going on, and the subsidy is going on, you have to borrow from abroad. Ironically, the IMF has been seeing this for the last 40 years, but it's keeping a blind eye to both corruption. You know, you have to improve the subsidy system. طب ما انتوا شايفين you know, I can't imagine that the economists of the IMF are not aware of what is going on and they can't see what I am telling you. It's impossible. But the IMF has the political aspect to it, of course, and they can't be hostile to a government where the United States is friendly with. So if the United States wants the corrupt government to continue, the IMF has to give the loans, or at least to go along with them. These governments, recent governments, and even before that, when they manage to get an approval of a loan, like from Qatar Marra, or Emirat Marra, or Saudi, or Kuwait, they say, you see, this is a sign of confidence in our economic performance. If they fail to get the loan from IMF, you're like, you see, it's a sign that we are sticking to our political independence. You know, so whether you get the loan or not, you have a very good justification. But everybody forgets, you know, it sounds big, $2 billion, $4 billion from Saudi Arabia or from Emirat. If you add them all up, they are less than the annual income from tourism in one good year. And nobody is attracting attention to this. Tourism brought to Egypt in the year before the revolution $11.5 billion. So add the Saudi Arabia and the Qatar and the Emirat. It wouldn't reach that. But on top of that, the loans have to be repaid. Tourism revenue does not have to be repaid. It has to be repaid with interest. So if you just do something to repair tourist situation, you don't need, apart from solving corruption, you don't need all that. Then we come to social justice. Then social justice, العدالة الاجتماعية, has been part of the rhetoric since the beginning of the revolution. And طبعا it has been part of the slogans of the revolution. كرامة إنسانية. Most of the ministers in all the cabinets since the revolution are not known to be particularly interested in social justice. I'm not going to mention names. Most of them. They are very good economists, but they have not had a history of, except Good Abdel Khair, who was a member of Tagamma. And when he came, I think he was offered وزارة التموين or the كان التضامن الاجتماعي. But he insisted that he should call it وزارة التموين والعدالة الاجتماعية. Minister of Supply and Social Justice. خير وبركة. You wonder what he will do among these beasts. Among these beasts who really don't want social justice at all. ويا عيني, after great struggle, the only thing he managed to do, to offer to the cabinet a proposal إنه توزيع البيوتين gas, الأنابيب البوتاجاز, cylinder, by ration. فالظاهر قالوا له العب بعيد. Really, it must have been like that. And he was removed at the first opportunity. This is the fate of somebody who really cares about social justice. Now, the first thing you require about people who really mean to implement social justice is to identify what is the main cause of corruption or of lack of justice. Nasser immediately recognized it in the first days of the 52, وقال لك the feudal system. And in less than 2 months after the July Revolution, he had the land reform law in September 52. And as a result, the semi-feudal system of Egypt practically disappeared. We never saw it before, after, practically. So he identified the problem and he did quite a lot towards removing it. What is the main, now feudalism is not the main source, the main problem with social justice now. I believe the main problem is the marriage between business and power. This has been growing on all through, from Sadat up to now. So if you really are interested in fulfilling social justice, announce this and do what is necessary to divorce, to dissolve the marriage between business and, but it hasn't been done. If you remember, in the early days of, after the fall of Mubarak, estimates of the Egyptian wealth smuggled abroad ran into tens of billions of dollars. And we say, we are getting back, we are getting it back. Not one penny. And England and Switzerland and maybe another government say, طب بس ادونا حكم قضائي, you just bring us a court sentence that these people have acquired this money illegally. Nothing of the sort. It never happened. All this just raises the questions, why? So of course, the simple answer is that the revolutionaries are not in power. The people who run the show are not the people who made the revolution. So that's one thing. What happened was simply, as my son Zarran al-Ramadi, you catch a minor minister, ya عيني غلبان, who made a mistake and acquire a piece of land, حبسوا مثلا. ياخدوا الواحد اللي ما عندوش ضهر. They will catch somebody who is not a threat to them. Minimum wages. This has been, by the way, this حد الأدنى للأجور has been raised since the beginning, the early days of the revolution, after the revolution, by ministers who are not particularly well known for concern about social justice. But it was raised, الحد الأدنى للأجور. I believe that this is not the time at all to talk about الحد الأدنى للأجور. With such a degree of unemployment, you just create jobs for people if they are ready to pay, to work for less than the minimum wage. And are you going to apply it to the private sector or only to the public sector? To apply it to the private sector is disastrous in the state of unemployment you have now. If you apply it to the government and public sector, you have the problem of inflation. Unless it could be lost in 1 year, or even less, as soon as you impose it. If inflation continues, it has of no value. The minimum wage has no value. So it's really used as a political trick. It's a deception. And if I don't know whether you remember or not, Rais al-Wazara, the Prime Minister, one day, about less than 2 months ago, a month ago, he made a hadith lil-Watan azon. He said, we don't have money for the minimum wage. 2 days later, it was announced that it was approved. How did this happen? How did this happen? Who told the Prime Minister to change his mind? But somebody did, for political reasons. In 52, talking about the land reform of 52, it went marvelously with the testimony of all the big economists of the world concerned with land reform, except one thing, the minimum agricultural wage, because there was so much unemployment in Egyptian agriculture at the time. Nasser imposed the minimum wage on agricultural labor. It was never implemented because the landlord has queues of people waiting to work for less than the minimum wage. What raised the minimum wage mass was the building of the high dam, was industrialization. That is what saved the situation. You have to attack the unemployment problem first before you talk about minimum wage. Then you come to maximum wage, which is even more of a farce. It was determined first as 35 times the minimum wage. I don't know where he got this 35 times. But only 2 days ago it was announced that the maximum wage in the government and public sector is 42,000 pounds. By the way, 42,000 pounds in the state of Egypt today sounds a great deal, you know, and I wonder how does it sound to a really poor person that this government official is taking 42,000 pounds a month. A month, in case you think it is a year. 42,000 pounds. This is the maximum. This is an aspect of social justice. My view of the matter is that they are not enforcing it on the private sector, only the government and the public sector. I believe that much more significant and practical to fight those incomes which people are getting for doing nothing at all. And in all big institutions, organizations, newspapers, who get part of the income from advertising, to all sorts of things, you know, that they are getting an income for nothing at all. So the maximum wage in this respect, in this case, would be zero, that it should be eliminated. So that is fighting corruption, not forcing a maximum wage. You just, again, you have to fight corruption. Then they talk about progressive taxation. Again, progressive taxation in the state of the economy as it is now is not a practical solution. You just go and collect the taxes which have not been paid. Instead of imposing new taxes, collect the taxes, which is, again, emphasizes the corruption bit. You don't collect the taxes which amount to 126 billion Egyptian pounds. Tax in arrears, tax evasion is 126 billion Egyptian pounds, of which half is due by the big taxpayers or the big non-tax payers, the rich. We haven't heard about fighting tax evasion. We used to hear a lot of things like that in the 60s. About maximum wage and fighting tax evasion and minimum wage, etc. Because the government was strong, it meant what it was saying, and now we really don't hear about it. So we haven't really got a strong state, we've got a very soft state. We didn't get any revolution that is fighting corruption, which is absolutely the first step you should do if you really mean a revolution and a reform in the economic system. One is tempted to say it was not a revolution at all. Or sometimes one says it is an abortive revolution. You may say that it doesn't make any difference. No revolution or abortive revolution. There is no baby. No baby has been born. But I think I like to say it is an abortive revolution, because at least if the baby is not born, you can try again and get the baby born.